Hello, everybody. Today I wanted to talk about one of the major keys to dealing good damage, and that's combat advantage. Now, most people by now in Mod 16 know that you should build a lot of combat advantage because it'll really help improve your numbers. However, what's not often talked about as much and not often explained as much is how combat advantage actually works and why it doesn't end up being as effective on ranged characters. So I've got a little bit of a basic setup here. I've got a summoned normal companion, an actual combat companion, not an augment, just for testing purposes. So my character's a little bit jacked up. And you see there's a circle around the target dummy, right? I'm set up opposite of my companion, my ally, whether it be, a summoned companion, whether it be an actual player. There's a circle, and there's a small radius within that circle that lights up blue if I'm standing in it, or it goes white if I'm not in the correct positioning. So as long as I have combat advantage, I'll get bonus damage basically, and that shows up with these yellow swords. The yellow sword numbers will be my combat advantage damage. Again, my stats are jacked up because I'm not using my normal augment. However, if you pay attention to this circle, if I step back too far, it completely disappears. And why is that? Well, I'm basically out of combat advantage range, which my warlock can hit from way, way back there. And it basically means combat advantage only works in melee range in a very small amount of actual, distance between you and the target. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing this guide, because it's a lot easier to visually understand. You remember those yellow sword numbers displaying combat advantage? I'm not getting any. The bent arrow is a deflection, but I'm not getting any yellow sword numbers. However, if I creep back up, all of a sudden the circle's back, and I'm getting yellow sword numbers again, combat advantage. So you see, combat advantage is basically skewed towards melee classes because of coding, one reason or another. And this didn't used to be as big a deal because you had basically combat advantage buffs, party buffs. A lot of the old marking system was granting combat advantage to all players on the team, and they removed a lot of that from the game. And basically, the net effect of this is ranged characters, if they want to do good damage, have to play at very, very close range, almost melee range. And basically, you're forcing all ranged characters to stay basically at melee range if they want to do good damage. And it's kind of sad because one of the big things that I thought was a benefit of kind of removing Anointed Army, which controlled the game for 2 years, is that maybe ranged classes could play as a ranged DPS again. Maybe we could stand all the way back here and take advantage of the fact that we can stand this far away, out of harm's way, and deal damage. Because Anointed Army made everyone have to stand really, really close if they wanted the party buffs, if they wanted the power buffs, if they want all that, you had to be right up in it. And now it's the same deal, except now it's combat advantage making that happen. So there are some combat advantage buffs left in the game. The Warlock has one, so I'll demonstrate that combat advantage can still work from a very far way away. But why do you have to go through all that hassle just because it's coded, to be preferential for melee characters? So I'm going to swap some things here quick to demonstrate it for you. Warlocks have no pity, no mercy. Critical hits now grant you combat advantage over critically hit targets for 4 seconds. That means just the target that you critically hit against. You can critically hit against multiple targets. But why do I have to go through all this hassle of taking off something like my 5% DPS so that I can coin flip on critical hits just to get a small 4-second window to deal combat advantage while I'm trying to juggle all my other stacking mechanics and whatnot? But we're going to equip it here, take off Dust to Dust. And you can see, from the range where I normally wouldn't get combat advantage, I'm going to start spamming this so I eventually crit, which I did there. And let's see, you see the sword numbers coming back now, right? And you can see the circle is fully lit up blue all around because no matter where I'm standing, I can get combat advantage because I'm now taking advantage of a combat advantage self buff and not the normal natural positioning combat advantage where I'd have to be standing very, very close to the target dummy. And again, I'm only one of the ranged classes. I don't play all the ranged DPS classes. Arbiter DC just came into the scene, so there's even more. But I doubt every single ranged class has the ability to self-buff. And again, the way that Cryptic has it coded is basically forcing all ranged classes to kind of be a meaningless distinction and forcing you to stand this close to get normal combat advantage. Because again, everyone knows it's a huge part of the game. You have, in Mod 16, the stat cap at 118,000. That's moving up in Mod 17 if you haven't seen any of the spoilers, if you haven't watched any of the new content people are putting out. That cap is moving up to 130,000. And if you've got 130,000 worth of stats, not doing anything simply because you're a ranged character and standing too far away, well, it's bad. And honestly, I think Cryptic should change it because, A, it's not intuitive. Let's look at the actual combat advantage description. It says nothing about a range here, right? Increases your damage when attacking an enemy from an advantageous position. So the big benefit of being ranged is you don't have to stand right up at an enemy. You don't have to take unnecessary hits. In fact, a lot of the ranged characters are very, very squishy just for the sole fact of, hey, they don't have to stand really close. They can stand in the back. I've got poor, some of these aren't the best examples, but let me look at my Hags Rags here. Does this even have armor class anymore? Maybe I'm just missing it. And they took it out of the game. But typically, ranged classes had very poor armor class just because, they weren't supposed to be in harm's way. And if they were, they were kind of messing up. But again, in-game mechanics have been forcing ranged classes to stand really close for a very, very long time. And it shouldn't be that way because the whole moving to the Holy Trinity system basically means a heavier reliance on your healers. And they have divinity, which is a limited resource they have to manage throughout the fights, throughout whatever encounter you're playing. And if the healer's wasting extra divinity because you're standing here trying to get extra DPS, which you should be doing extra DPS to get it over quicker, to be doing your job, if you're on the lower end, so that people don't try to kick you because they see your numbers and you're not as performing as well. And it's like, it's not intuitive. The most advantageous position should be, hey, I'm a ranged class. I can hit the enemy from all the way over here, without taking damage. So why wouldn't I? And again, it's because of coding. It's because of the way that they've set it up. Now, most people haven't even noticed that much, again, because this is a shift in the game that occurred largely with them taking the buffs out when they created Mod 16. Most classes had a full party buff that would grant everyone combat advantage, and that kind of stuff is just a lot rarer nowadays. The other thing is a lot of people are running augments, so a lot of people don't have combat advantage when they're doing their solo play, so they don't even notice. I've still got the 1 power on, so I'll throw it off again from when I crit. So here you see I've got my augment. There's no circles for me because the augment, even though he visually shows up on your screen, he doesn't actually participate in combat, so you can't get positional. I really only noticed it, at the beginning of Mod 16, and that's mostly because I wanted to see the viability on the Warlock with natural combat positioning. So I'm going to have to, I believe this should work fine. I just got to get it cursed. So I did a lot of testing with the Soul Puppet because the Soul Puppet basically acts as an extra companion. you can see I've got a window over here. He's going to disappear because I haven't curse consumed in a while. But you can see I can get natural combat advantage off my soul puppet. And so that's when I really got interested in combat advantage, how it worked, because I'd be running my master expeditions. You know, my soul puppet would go do his own thing, right? He's staying and basically behaving now because there's only these target dummies. But, you know, out in the open world, my soul puppet will get a mind of its own. It'll go chase random enemies. I'll be like, hey, wait a second, there's my combat advantage running away from me. You know, and then you're playing this weird mini game of chasing your soul puppet around because you can't control it. You know, and like I said, there are some workarounds. I don't know what every single class has available to them. The Scourge Warlock has its own workaround. You can choose to use that if you want. I prefer to try to just stay in melee range and take advantage of natural combat advantage when I'm playing in a group. You know, but there's no reason really why you should have to. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to stand from right here and get combat advantage. That combat advantage right there was just the curse taking off. But there's no reason why this is too far for a ranged character to deal good damage. It just doesn't make sense. And honestly, I think it needs to be changed. Whether or not you can hit it from anywhere, because the self-buff version lets you hit it from anywhere. But just think of how far my range is and how close I actually have to be to get combat advantage. It's bad. And I don't have much else to say about that. So I hope this helps. If you didn't understand combat advantage, if you didn't know that it has a range on it, it affects, I don't know, maybe a fourth of the classes. You've got your Scourge Warlocks, your Control Wizards, your DCs, your Hunter Rangers, you know, a lot of melee classes. Obviously it doesn't affect because they're always at close range, but I'm sure some people this might come as a shock. And like I said, it's over 100k worth of stats difference, whether you're getting it or not, where you're standing. So it's important to talk about. So I hope this discussion helped you. Thank you very much for watching.